Amelia stepped into the house and felt the silence wrap itself around her like a heavy cloak. The air was still, filled with the faint smell of new paint, wood, and the weight of empty rooms. It was supposed to feel like a fresh start, she thought. A new life in a new town. But everything about it felt strange, nerving. The move had been practical, or at least that's what she told herself. A change of scenery, away from the memories that had begun to suffocate her in their old apartment. She needed something more than the constant hum of city life, more than the echoes of Marcus's voice that still lingered in the corners of their once shared space when the cancer took him. It didn't ask for permission. One day he was there, full of ideas, laughter, and hope for their future, and the next his body had shriveled into something unrecognizable. She'd watched him slip away slowly, each day pulling further from her, until she was left alone in a quiet house filled with the remnants of who he had been. His absence had been a hollow ache, one that refused to leave no matter how hard she tried to move on. Even after months of therapy, of trying to make peace with his death, the weight of his loss pressed on her like a physical thing. Moving here to this small countryside town was supposed to be her escape from the loneliness, a way to reclaim herself. Yet, as she unpacked box after box, stacking the books and the plates that were once a part of their shared life, Amelia realized she was not escaping anything. She was just walking into another kind of silence. That morning, as she opened the front door for a bit of fresh air, she saw the cat Dot. It was lying curled up on the porch, small and ragged, almost blending into the shadows. Its fur was a mix of gray and brown, streaked with dirt and matted in places. There were patches where its coat had been worn away, revealing skin that looked too thin for comfort. The wind tugged at its fur, but the cat didn't. Flinched. Amelia stood frozen in the doorway for a moment, the cool morning air biting at her skin, her breath clouding in front of her. It didn't seem frightened, not at all. There was a quiet dignity in the way it lay there, as though it belonged, not to the house or to her, but to the world beyond. Dot. She didn't know why she felt drawn to it. Perhaps it was the quiet companionship that the cat offered, the stillness that mirrored her own. Or maybe it was the way the animal's amber eyes, sharp and almost wise, met hers without hesitation. It felt like something had reached out to her, an unspoken understanding, an invitation of sorts. "Hey there," Amelia said softly, her voice hoarse from lack of use. She hadn't spoken much in the past few months, her conversations limited to the doctors, the movers, and the occasional hello to a neighbor. The cat didn't move. It blinked once, slowly, and then turned its head slightly, as though appraising her. For a moment, Amelia thought it might stand up and walk away, disappearing as quickly as it had come. She stepped forward cautiously, unsure of what to do. Her hand hovered in the air for a moment, as if waiting for permission to reach out, but the cat simply watched her, unblinking, as if it had all the time in the world. It was then that she noticed the small scar on its ear, a ragged tear that seemed to have healed a long time ago. The cat's body was thin, its ribs just barely visible beneath its fur. Amelia felt a strange pang of sympathy. "Are you hungry?" she asked, even though she had no way of knowing if the cat could understand her. Her voice was soft and tentative, as though she wasn't sure if the cat would even answer. It blinked again, and then, as if in response, stretched out a paw and pulled itself into a sitting position, its tail curling around its feet. Amelia stood there, hesitant, unsure of what to do. She looked around for something, anything to offer it. The only thing she had was the small bowl of tuna she'd set out earlier for herself, a leftover from the lunch she had eaten alone. She went back inside, the door creaking closed behind her. In the quiet of the kitchen, Amelia opened the can of tuna, the familiar metallic sound of the lid coming off echoing through the silence. She placed the food on a saucer and returned to the porch, her heart beating a little faster now. Unsure of the next step, when she returned, the cat was still there, but it had shifted, moving a little closer to the door. It didn't approach the food right away. Instead, it sat and watched her, its amber eyes unwavering. Amelia crouched down slowly, offering the saucer with a careful hand. The cat sniffed the air but didn't move. It was as though it was waiting for something, a sign, an invitation. To trust. She felt the weight of the moment. It wasn't just about the food or the cat, it was something deeper. She had felt so alone for so long, and now this small creature, with its scarred body and quiet demeanor, had appeared at her door. A part of her wanted to believe that it was a sign that things might not always be as lonely as they seemed. "Here," she whispered, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "It's okay." Finally, the cat moved. It padded slowly over to the saucer, sniffed the tuna, and then, without hesitation, began to eat. Amelia sat on the step, watching, her breath steadying as she felt something inside her relax, just a little. The cat ate quietly, its movements deliberate and slow. There was no rush, no hurry, just the steady rhythm of hunger being satisfied. She didn't know why, but it felt like the first time in a long time that she wasn't completely alone. She didn't speak again, not needing to. The world outside seemed to pause, the wind gentler, the air softer. For a while there was nothing but the sound of the cat eating, and the quiet pulse of the day unfolding. When the cat had finished, it didn't run off. It simply sat, as though deciding whether to stay or leave. Amelia stood up slowly, still watching the animal. "I'll leave you some more tomorrow," she promised quietly. The cat looked at her once more before it turned and padded off the porch. Disappearing into the shadows of the yard, Amelia didn't move. She stood there for a long while, the empty saucer in her hand. She wasn't sure why she felt this way. Maybe it was the tenderness in the cat's eyes, or the quiet way it had accepted her presence without question. She had been afraid of feeling this close to anyone or anything, afraid of letting herself care. But for the first time in months, she felt something warm stir in her chest. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The days blurred into one another after that morning. Amelia didn't question it, she didn't need to. The cat returned just as silently and steadily as it had come. Each morning it would be waiting for her, perched on the porch or sitting just beyond the doorstep, as though it had always been there. Its amber eyes would meet hers, and in that quiet gaze she saw something she couldn't name, something like understanding, or perhaps something deeper, like a silent agreement between them both. She had grown used to seeing it there. There were no words between them, no urgent demands or meowing. Just that shared stillness, that simple, unspoken presence. And in that, Amelia began to find a kind of peace. On the third day, she left out more tuna. This time, the cat didn't hesitate. It walked right up to the dish, its tail swaying gently with each step. It ate with careful precision, as though it savored every bite. She sat at the edge of the porch, her legs tucked beneath her, watching it eat. Her thoughts, which had been a constant whirlpool of guilt, grief, and loneliness, quieted in the presence of the cat. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like a visitor in her own life. She felt like she belonged here, in this place. With this animal, the cat's presence began to anchor her in a way she hadn't expected. She noticed small things, how it always arrived at sunrise, how its fur seemed to shimmer just a little in the light. Each evening it would sit on the windowsill while she read, its amber eyes following her every movement. Sometimes in the middle of a page, Amelia would catch herself looking up at it, wondering if it could somehow sense the weight of her thoughts. She tried to talk to it once, offering her voice more freely. "I used to talk to Marcus this way," she said, her words as much for herself as for the cat. "He'd always listen, even if he didn't understand. I suppose I'm just trying to find that again." The cat didn't respond, of course. But in some strange way she felt heard. Weeks passed. It was a slow and subtle change. Each morning the cat would arrive, and each night it would leave. It never lingered for too long, and never did it demand anything more than a place to rest, a bit of food, and a silent acknowledgement. It didn't make her feel rushed, didn't demand her attention. It was as if it understood that time, in all its complexity, had to be given slowly, gently. One evening, Amelia was sitting on the front porch after dinner, a steaming cup of tea cradled between her hands. The sun was dipping low on the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and orange. The cat had appeared a little earlier than usual, and this time it was lying in the patch of lavender she had planted the previous week. The plants had barely started to bloom, but already they filled the air with a sweet, calming fragrance. She could almost hear them stretching towards the light. Amelia smiled and sipped her tea. It was a small thing, but it felt good to see the garden growing. It was one of the few things she had done entirely on her own, without the shadow of Marcus's absence looming over it. It was hers. The cat, too, had become hers. It had no collar, no tag, no markings that identified it as anyone's pet. It belonged to no one, and yet, somehow, it had claimed her in the most quiet, unassuming way. "You never ask for much, do you?" she murmured to it. The cat was curled on the lavender, its eyes closed, its body relaxed. "Just a little food, a little company. I should be so lucky." She noticed, too, that Whiskers, though she hadn't said it aloud yet, the name had stuck, wasn't the kind of cat that begged for affection. He didn't climb into her lap, didn't nuzzle for attention, and certainly didn't follow her around the house. But when she sat quietly, he would sit with her. It wasn't a demand. It was simply that he was there. That was the way of things now. Gentle, subtle, and without urgency, the routine became comforting. In the mornings, Amelia would find the cat waiting for her as though it had been there all night, watching over her while she slept. It would eat its food slowly and then retreat into the bush or sit in the corner of the porch, content to simply watch her move about her day. She would water the plants, tidy up the yard, maybe take a walk along the edge of the forest behind the house. At night she would read by the fire, her eyes scanning the pages, but often drifting upward to find the cat watching her from the window. She began to feel something else too, a slow, creeping feeling that she hadn't experienced in a long time. It was something that had once existed between her and Marcus, something simple and ordinary that had become almost invisible with time. It was a feeling of connection, of unspoken understanding. When Marcus was alive, there had been days when they didn't need words. They would sit together, doing separate things, but feeling together somehow. Amelia had missed that more than anything. Now she had it again, in the quiet companionship of Whiskers. But there was something else, a strange, almost unsettling feeling buried deep in her chest. Every time the cat sat on the windowsill, watching her from across the room, she felt a tiny tug of something. Was it expectation? Hope? She couldn't quite place it. But there was a feeling that the cat, despite its silence, was offering her something more. It wasn't just the food or the small comfort it provided with its presence. It was something else. It was like it was waiting for her to acknowledge the bond they shared, waiting for her to step forward into something more than just survival. In the quiet, unspoken moments, Amelia could almost feel the weight of that invitation. One morning, as she was sitting on the porch with her coffee, watching the fog lift from the valley, the cat didn't show up. It was the first time in weeks that she hadn't seen him. She stood up, pacing for a moment, then looked down the narrow road that wound through the yard and into the woods. Maybe he had wandered off, she told herself. But even as she thought it, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. She went inside, looking for something to occupy her mind. But there was a heaviness in her chest now, an unease that wouldn't let go. She couldn't shake the feeling that the cat, this small, silent creature, was offering her something far greater than she was ready to accept. It was then that she understood. She wasn't just taking care of the cat. In some strange way, he had been taking care of her all along. The winter had arrived with a vengeance. It wasn't like the winters Amelia had known in the city. Here, in the countryside, the cold seemed to wrap around everything, seeping into the bones of the earth, turning the landscape into a world of quiet, frozen beauty. The trees were bare, their branches stark against the gray sky, and the ground had been covered with a thick blanket of snow that came and stayed, unrelenting. Amelia had always loved the seasons, how they each carried their own rhythm and soul. But this winter felt different. The crisp air, the distant howls of the wind, it seemed to mirror the stillness inside her. The first snowstorm arrived in early December, and she couldn't help but think it was fitting. The world had gone to sleep, as had she, in a way. The house, though warm, felt colder than it had in the fall. She hadn't seen Whiskers that day. She assumed he was holed up somewhere, sheltering from the weather, as cats tend to do. Yet the emptiness was sharp. She found herself looking at the windowsill every few minutes, waiting for the familiar flash of amber eyes. But he hadn't returned. The storm grew stronger by evening. The wind howled against the walls of the house, and the trees outside creaked and groaned. Amelia lit a fire in the hearth, the crackling warmth filling the room with its familiar comfort. She curled up in her chair, her book open but forgotten in her lap. It was then that she heard it, a soft scratching sound, faint at first, like a whisper against the door. Amelia froze, her heart leaping into her throat. For a moment, she didn't know if she was imagining it, if the isolation was playing tricks on her. But then it came again, a distinct, rhythmic scratching. She stood quickly and moved to the door. Her hand hovered over the knob, hesitating. The wind was howling outside, and the idea of stepping out into the storm made her stomach tighten. But then she remembered. She remembered the quiet companionship, the unspoken bond that had grown between them. The way Whiskers had always been there, waiting, without asking for anything more than presence. She opened the door. There, standing just beyond the threshold, drenched from the storm, was Whiskers. His fur was matted, his body shivering from the cold. His amber eyes, still steady, met hers. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. He had never come to the door like this before, never so bold, so vulnerable. She stepped back quickly, gesturing for him to come inside. He didn't hesitate. His small, fragile body padded across the floor and into the warmth of the house without a second thought. He looked up at her once and then immediately lay down in front of the fireplace, curling his body into a tight ball. For a moment, Amelia simply stood there, watching him. She closed the door behind her, shutting out the storm. "Did you come to get warm?" she asked softly, though she didn't expect an answer. "Is that all?" But she already knew. He wasn't just seeking warmth from the fire, he was seeking warmth from her. And in the same quiet way, he had given her that warmth from the very beginning. She knelt beside him, running her fingers through his damp fur. His body was trembling, but his gaze never wavered. It was as if, in the midst of the storm, he had come to find her. She picked up a towel from the chair by the door and gently began to dry him off, feeling his warmth through the thick fabric. The whole time, his eyes remained fixed on hers, not in fear, but in the same understanding they had shared since the first moment they met. They didn't need words. They didn't need anything more than this quiet, tender exchange. When he was dry, he settled by the fire, curling his tail around his body as he blinked slowly, content. Amelia sat back, watching him, feeling a soft smile pull at her lips. She hadn't realized how much she had missed the act of caring for someone. Something. It was as though, for the first time in months, she had been reminded of how small, gentle acts of kindness could carry meaning, could heal wounds that she didn't know were still open. The storm raged outside, but inside the fire burned brighter and the house felt full. Not in the loud, bustling way of a family home, but in a quiet, more profound way, like a place that had been left in stillness, only to be filled with a gentle presence. Amelia sat with him for hours, the storm outside growing fiercer by the minute. The wind rattled against the windows and the trees outside thrashed violently. But inside there was peace. She didn't know how long they sat together. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the room. Eventually she stood and made herself a cup of tea. She brought it to the chair by the fire and sat down again, gazing into the flames. Whiskers raised his head slightly, meeting her gaze. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she didn't feel alone. He had come to her in the storm not because he needed something, but because he understood something. He knew that in the midst of the world's turbulence, there was a quiet place to be found. He knew that sometimes the best way to weather a storm was simply to be there beside someone, with no expectations, just presence. "I'm glad you're here," Amelia said quietly, more to herself than to him. Whiskers blinked at her. Slowly, as though he understood, the fire crackled softly, and the world outside continued to rage. But inside, in the stillness of that room, something had shifted. The storm outside was only a reminder of the storms that they had both weathered in their own ways. She had been grieving, isolating herself from everything and everyone, and yet here she was, with this small, quiet creature that had entered her life without fanfare, without demand. He had been the stillness she had needed. And maybe, just maybe, she was the warmth he had sought. The storm passed, as all storms do. The snow settled into a pristine blanket over the ground, undisturbed and silent, a soft reminder that the world could still feel like new after the chaos. Whiskers, though, didn't return the following morning. At first, Amelia thought nothing of it. He had done this before, come and gone as he pleased, staying for days, then disappearing for a time, as if he belonged to no one and nowhere. She assumed he had found shelter elsewhere, perhaps under the old barn down the road, or tucked away somewhere in the woods. She hadn't seen him leave, but she didn't expect him to follow any kind of schedule. He was a wanderer, and she had come to accept that. But the days stretched into a week, and still no sign of him. The porch where he usually lay in the mornings was empty. The windowsill where he had watched her with those amber eyes was bare. Every time she passed by the door, her heart would give a small, hopeful leap, only to fall when she saw that he wasn't there. The loneliness, once softened by his quiet companionship, returned in full force. It had always been there, lingering just beneath the surface of her new life. And now, without him, it felt louder, sharper. She found herself looking at the clock on the wall, counting the hours between meals, between the moments of the day when she didn't know what to do with herself. The house, once again, became too quiet. The ticking of the clock seemed to echo in the emptiness. She tried to focus on other things, sorting through old photos, putting more of the house in order, but nothing held her attention for long. Her eyes kept drifting to the door, waiting for the familiar soft scrape of claws against wood, or the delicate pressure of Whisker's small body against her legs. The absence of him felt more profound than she had anticipated. The warmth that had been restored to her life by his presence seemed to be draining away. She hadn't realized how much she had come to rely on those small, unspoken moments until they were gone. A week passed. Still no sign. On the 8th day, as she was tending to the small garden she had started outside the kitchen window, Amelia found something. It was tucked into the corner near the back fence, just beneath the lilac bush where she sometimes left out food for the stray birds. It was a leather collar, worn and frayed, the small metal tag glinting in the weak winter sunlight. Her heart skipped a beat. She knelt to pick it up, the cold metal in her hand sending a chill up her spine. The tag was worn, the engraving faded, but there was one word on it, clear and steady, always. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't know why, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just any collar. It felt personal. She had never seen the cat wear a collar before, and yet here it was, small and well worn, as if it had been a part of him for a long time. It was as if Whiskers had left this behind as a silent message, a piece of himself to linger in the world even after he had gone. Amelia sat back on her heels, the collar still in her hand. She felt the weight of it, not just in her fingers, but in her chest. The sadness she had been trying to ignore finally spilled over. It was as though Whiskers had come to her with a purpose that, she now realized, had always been bigger than she could comprehend. She had known from the beginning that the cat was different. He had never asked for much, never demanded affection or attention, but his presence had been healing, steadying her in ways she couldn't explain. But now it seemed that he had come into her life only to leave. And he had left something behind, something simple, but profound. Always. She couldn't stop herself from holding the collar to her chest. The words were a quiet reminder of the impermanence of all things, the inevitability of loss. Whiskers had not been hers to keep. She knew that. He had never belonged to her, not in the traditional sense. He had simply appeared, offering comfort, without asking for anything in return, and now it seemed he had moved on again. Amelia stood slowly, the collar still clenched tightly in her hand. She walked back toward the porch, the weight of the collar heavy in her palm. She sat down on the steps, staring out over the yard, but her mind kept drifting back to the cat, his amber eyes, the quiet way he had watched her, the stillness he brought with him. It felt like he had come into her life to teach her something. Something she wasn't quite ready to learn. Always. The words echoed in her mind. It felt like a promise, but a promise of what? That nothing lasts forever? Or that love, in all its quiet forms, never really leaves? She wasn't sure. She only knew that she missed him. And that was enough. The following days were quieter than usual. The weather was colder now, the ground hard with frost. The loneliness was less oppressive, but it still lingered, a quiet hum in the background of her day. She kept expecting Whiskers to show up, to appear on the porch as he always had, his amber eyes searching for her, his body seeking warmth. But he didn't come. And with each passing day, Amelia realized that his absence wasn't just a void, it was a part of her own journey. Whiskers had come to her when she needed him most, had shown her a form of companionship she hadn't known. She was searching for. And now, as suddenly as he had arrived, he had gone. She didn't understand why. She didn't understand the nature of his visit, or why he had stayed with her when he did. But somehow, she felt that he had given her something more than she had even realized. He had reminded her that love didn't always need to be held tight. It didn't have to be permanent to be meaningful. Amelia looked down at the collar in her hand again, the edges worn with time, the single word etched into the metal. Always. She didn't know if Whiskers would ever return. But she would carry him with her in the quietest parts of her heart. Because sometimes the things that leave us are the things that stay forever. As the days pass, life continues to unfold in ways we may not always understand. Like Amelia and Whiskers, we too are bound to moments fleeting yet profound. We experience the quiet companionship of others, the solace in shared silence, and the inevitable pain of letting go. But in all of this, there is beauty in the impermanence, in the love we give and receive, and in the peace that comes when we learn to let things flow as they will. Take a moment today to reflect on the whiskers in your life, those quiet moments of connection, the things that may have entered your world only to leave, leaving behind memories, lessons, or something unspoken. Honor them. Let them remind you that love isn't always about possession. It's about presence. So as you go forward, remember, even in solitude, even in loss, there is always room for something new to grow. Allow the quiet spaces in your life to be filled with growth, reflection, and peace. And like Amelia, embrace the stillness. If you feel that gentle tug in your heart, listen to it. It's never too late to welcome healing, to offer compassion, or to seek comfort in unexpected places.